Dr. Joseph Azize is a priest in the Maronite Catholic Church, where he serves as chancellor. He is also an honorary associate at the University of Sydney. For 23 years, he was a practicing attorney. He is the author of Gurdjieff, Mysticism, Contemplation, and Exercises, published by Oxford University Press in 2020. The title of his talk, Higher Energies, Higher Food, the Practical Reality of the Spiritual Life. Following Joseph's talk, Jack Kane from Ontario will bring the first question. Welcome, Joseph.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Joseph, you can begin now.
Good. For George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who died in 1949, I suggest the key concept is that as we are, we do not directly perceive much more than a small portion of objective reality. But we should and can develop our innate potential, becoming to a state in which we can approach this. And the key to this is found in the title of his third series of writings, Life is Real Only Then When I Am. I shall shortly say something about who Gurdjieff was, his life and times, but first, I think it may be better to develop the key concept, as I have termed it, if only because once we understand something of his aim, we understand why he wanted people to concern themselves only with his teaching and not with himself. As we are, said Gurdjieff, our state is forever fluctuating. We do not have one stable state of consciousness. We sleep at night, and when we awake, we find ourselves in one of a variety of states. We can be more or less sleepy, more or less alert. This is not something to gloss over. It is a clue to the nature of our waking state, which Gurdjieff called waking consciousness, or a relative state of consciousness. In this condition, we are able to relate to the world around us, something not possible in sleep, where we are utterly prone and passive. But there are certain features about our relative state of consciousness which lead us to conclude that it is in fact a state of hypnotic wakefulness, or what amounts to the same thing, a state of hypnotic sleep, as measured by the states of consciousness we could enjoy. In the relative state of consciousness, and I stress once more that this is a shorthand way of speaking of a range of states, we do not perceive much more than a small portion of objective reality. In this state, none of us can truly say, I. We are full of conflicting thoughts, emotions, and attitudes. As we are, our bodies are stimulated by external influences and impressions, and these produce in us corresponding desires, which provoke corresponding thoughts. We are effectively automatons under the influence of externals, but we are adept at explaining, justifying, and defending our passing desires and small wills as being consciously chosen. Sometimes a particular group of desires are stronger and more permanent in a person, but this is again the chance result of external factors. The obsession is internalized, and to us it appears to be mine. We identify to use Gurdjieff's word, with our smallest whims and our most powerful infatuations alike. If this is how we appear as a gender portrait, then in detail it can be said we have three main centres of operation: our intellect, our emotions, and our physical apparatus. Each of these functions has a centre or brain. These centres are not always well connected, one with the other, as they should be in a healthy person. In fact, said Gurdjieff, these two states of sleep and waking consciousness are directly related to the degree to which our centres are connected. Full and refreshing sleep occurs when the three centres are disconnected one from the other, and they can recruit their energies. Bad sleep is a function of connections between centres continuing as we try to sleep, hence the phenomenon of turning thoughts or emotional disturbance keeping us awake at night. As he once said, one-centred activity is hallucination. Two-centred activity is semi-hallucination. Three-centred is none. The lack of internal connection between centres usually becomes worse as we grow older, not least because we become more entrenched in mechanical habits and more conditioned by external factors. Whereas what a child feels, the whole of a child feels and also thinks, with us, there is invariably a disconnection between mind and emotion. Each of our centres optimally works with a specific energy. This means that all of the centres are material, matter being one aspect of energy, and force likewise being another aspect of matter and energy. Where there is matter, there is force, and there is also energy. Therefore, not only our bodies, but also our intellect and emotions are material. But they are of a materiality which is finer than that of the physical body. We have now mentioned two states of consciousness, sleep and relative or waking consciousness. There are also two higher states available for us, self-remembering or self-consciousness, and then objective consciousness. Higher levels of knowledge are available in each higher state. Hence, while asleep, we cannot know the truth, or we cannot distinguish dreams from reality. In relative consciousness, we can know relative truth. We can see that we are awake and not asleep, that we cannot fly, that if we are not careful crossing the road, we may be run down, and we can learn languages, practice sports, and so on. Self-consciousness, the first stage of a consciousness in touch with some reality, is a function of the operation of the first of the higher centres, what Gurdjieff called higher emotional centre. These higher centres use a finer energy than that used by the lower centres, and they can directly perceive both subjective and objective reality. I repeat, all the centres are organs of knowledge. The knowledge of the centres is of different kinds, but all are of use to us. A simple example is how an unimaginative pedant cannot comprehend and may even despise the reasons of a person who has been influenced by their feeling. If we have these higher centres, and all centres are organs of knowledge, then why do we not always sense reality? Shortly, to receive the results of their working, the lower centres must be harmoniously related among themselves and also related to the higher brains. We return again to the importance of unity within, so as to be corresponding to the cosmic unity. It is rather as if some parts of a machine had to be operating before other parts could be engaged. Our ordinary centres work too slowly and too chaotically to mesh, as it were, with the higher centres. Imagine a relay race where a runner fumbled each time he tried to pass the baton because he was too slow and awkward to pass it smoothly to the next runner. Also, the higher centres themselves need more of the finer energies proper for them to be able to achieve a certain solidity within what Gurdjieff called our common presence. Gurdjieff had much to say about these finer energies and how to manufacture them so that we could use them. Now, Gurdjieff had a method. Gurdjieff said that we should and can develop our innate potential for coming to reality. All his many diverse ideas and techniques served becoming conscious of one's own reality as an actual, vivid experience, and through that experience to correspond within human limits to objective reality. Hence, as I've mentioned, he wrote that life is real only then when I am. His life's work was to share the possibilities which I had discovered of touching reality, and if so desired, of even merging with it. And in that merging, the sense of my present reality is central. It is a different life. One's consciousness shifts to a level which is self-evidently fuller, higher, impartial. There are no thoughts, but there is consciousness. For all thought implies a certain consciousness, but it by no means follows that all consciousness includes thinking. There is a possible state which is replete with a sense of I am here. I am where I should be, as I should be. I am in my place, and yet I am related to my history and to my experience. I am this, but neither am I separate from that. This is a subjective experience of reality. Beyond this, an objective experience of reality is possible, but we can say little about it. It is impossible to fully put this experience of subjective reality into words. The effort to do so is necessarily misleading because the words impose a uniformity on the experience, which is not true truth. Perhaps the strongest impression in such states is the sense that I am, that I exist. But because I exist as an individual, a unique configuration of consciousness, energy, and experience, Even this fundamental impression will always and necessarily be individual and unique, and therefore will challenge, if not defeat, comparison. Once one has had this experience of being separate from one's own thoughts and feelings, of abiding above them, as it were, there begins a revaluation of all science, art and craft in line with Gurdjieff's science of being. To attain to consciousness of and in reality, even if only by moments, is to realign all one's values and aims. I have made my individual contribution to a deeper comprehension of Gurdjieff's work in my 2019 study, Gurdjieff, Mysticism, Contemplation and Exercises, Oxford University Press. There, I suggested that Gurdjieff could best be described as a mystic. This is not because he was not a thinker, an artist, a craftsman, or a scientist. He was all of these. But the goal of mysticism, the experience of the presence of God, is the highest pursuit possible for humanity. And therefore, to say that Gurdjieff was a mystic is to typify him by reference to what is highest in his work. Neither is there any contradiction between being a scientist and a mystic. Both are ways of approaching knowledge. Now, once we understand something of what Gurdjieff's ideas and methods were, we can understand why he did not wish to point to himself. In fact, he wished to hide himself, as it were. And so we come to his life, and then the final point of this paper. Briefly, Gurdjieff was born in Gyumri, Armenia, then known as Alexandropol, most likely in 1877, but possibly as early as 1866. Let's not be distracted by this oddity. He died in 1949 in Paris. These two facts are a symbol of his life. He began in the East, and he brought everything he had to the West, where he left his body. There is no question except that he claimed to have penetrated to places of initiation and esoteric wisdom in Asia, places of a nature which existed nowhere else on earth. He appeared in Russia in about 1911, teaching a system which might be compared to theosophy and anthroposophy, in that it was replete with the cosmology, anthropology, and psychology, and methods for attaining to certain powers which were said to be potential but rarely realized. Gurdjieff was no less controversial and colourful than Blavatsky. During the last 38 years of his life, the teaching years, he based himself first in Russia until the revolution forced him into a period of wandering until he settled in France, where he remained from 1922 to 1949, making certain journeys in Europe and many voyages to the USA. Although he wrote a 3-volume masterwork titled Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, his writings were only published posthumously. During his life, he was chiefly known for his talks and for his sacred dances or movements. In what I might call the Gurdjieff tradition, ideas are taught and his practical techniques are developed and applied. In addition, his music, chiefly piano music, is valued. Probably all the groups which call themselves Gurdjieff groups use meditative exercises, but so far as I can see, few of them use the authentic Gurdjieff contemplation-like exercises, what Gurdjieff called transformed contemplation, even if most of them use exercises which they mistakenly think hail from Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff has a rather mixed reputation in academic circles, with a few instances where he is known to academics at all. To the best of my knowledge, if he is mentioned in university courses, it is in the area of religious studies, especially when treating of Western esotericism and new religious movements. He does not seem to feature in philosophy, theology, or psychology units. I think Gurdjieff would have been quite unmoved, even indifferent to this. On the one hand, some, like Anthony Storr, criticised him, saying, reviewing his picture of the universe, it is hard to understand that any intelligent, educated person could believe it. One perspective on Gurdjieff is decidedly negative, the other is decidedly positive. Perhaps the very root of the differing assessments of Gurdjieff is the difficulty of categorising him. If one approaches him as a deviser of intellectual systems, judging him on modern Western rationalist criteria, as Storr does, one will be more likely to come to the conclusion which Storr did. If, however, one sees him as offering an esoteric teaching based on knowledge and methods of awakening long forgotten in the West, as do Brown and colleagues, then Gurdjieff will appear as someone not to be judged by the standards applied to philosophers or even theologians in the Western academic tradition. Again, I think Gurdjieff would be indifferent to either opinion. He saw himself bringing a teaching with the potential to cause a revolution in the internal worlds of people, and if enough people experience this, to change the wider world. For this reason, J.G. Bennett died in 1974, one of Gurdjieff's most accomplished pupils, titled his major study of his teacher, Gurdjieff, Making a New World. Yet, these methods and ideas, by their very nature, can never be popular and can only be adopted and practiced by individuals, optimally collaborating in small groups. As I have mentioned, not all in the Gurdjieff tradition use these exercises. Yet, my main interest has been in the contemplation-like exercises. An important part of these exercises is the elaboration and conscious use of energy. To come to a state of self-remembering, energy is needed. Our bodies elaborate a lot of energy, but much of it is wasted by negative emotions, for example, hatred, anger, jealousy, self-pity, and by useless functionings, such as unnecessary talking, whether external or internal, unnecessary suffering and nursing grievances, daydreaming, and muscular tension. Further, we do not produce enough of the higher energies needed for the linking of the lower and higher centers. We have, said Gurdjieff, three foods, that is, three sources of nourishment for the centers. These are ordinary food and drink, but also air, and impressions. Air is a food. Without it, the organism dies. Even with poor quality air, the body suffers, and one's mental workings are impaired, and Gurdjieff would suggest one's feelings. But the most critical food of all for anyone wishing to work with the higher centres to experience subjective reality is the food of impressions. Now, impressions in Gurdjieff is a very broad term, comprehending both external and internal perceptions, for example, of internal pain or pleasure, or of our own thoughts and feelings, of our entire state and the state of other people. One sometimes senses that there is something, as we say, in the air. Certain fine impressions, what we might call religious impressions, are not received by all people, or rather they could learn to receive them, but they strive past them. I am emphatically not saying that one receives higher impressions by taking music appreciation or wine tasting courses. These are all impressions of the same order as hearing any music or appreciating any food, only more detailed. The religious impressions I am referring to fall on the feeling centre, and the chief obstacles to receiving them are negative emotions and identification with whatever is occupying us at any moment. Further, Gurdjieff spoke about certain high energies so fine that we can only call them impressions by agreement and in lieu of a better word. These can be, he said, digested and assimilated. Some of his contemplation-like exercises were given for the purpose of connecting the interpretant with what he called accumulators of energy, small accumulators and a large accumulator of energy located with each human body, and then greater accumulators located at a planetary level and hence available to all individuals. To Uspensky, Gurdjieff said, small accumulators suffice for the ordinary everyday work of life, but for work on oneself, for inner growth, and for the efforts which are required of a man who enters the way, the energy from these small accumulators is not enough. We must learn how to draw energy straight from the large accumulator. Gurdjieff later added another level to this when he said to John Bennett, ever since I was a young boy, I have known the existence of this power, that is, the great reservoir or accumulator of higher emotional energy, and of the barriers that separate man from it. And I have searched until I found the way of breaking through them. This is the greatest secret that man can discover about human nature. I shall not present it here in any detail, but I have developed the thesis that Gurdjieff was practically permanently connected not only with the large accumulator, but more importantly, with the great reservoir or accumulator beyond that. In a talk that Bennett gave in October 1965 to a Gurdjieff group in Stoke-on-Trent, he said, one cannot lift oneself from one level to another without help from a higher level. This has to be grasped and grasped again and assimilated and remembered. The help that we receive is limited by one thing only, and that is our capacity to receive it. This enlarging of the capacity to be able to receive is sometimes called the opening of the heart, because the heart is compared to a vessel. Heart here does not mean emotion. It is different. If you know what is meant in the language of the system by the higher emotional center, that is the vessel that I am talking about. For most people, the higher emotional center is no larger than a thimble, but it is made of such material that it is capable of growing without limits. If only we could be given the power to see this. It is invisible to ordinary eyes. Now, in conclusion, much has been left unsaid because time is limited. But to draw this together, I see there as being four aspects of Gurdjieff's work, which is how he referred to his ideas and methods when put into practice. These aspects are to some extent synchronous. They have to go on simultaneously, especially the first three. But the emphasis at the start must, I think, be on the earlier or preparatory aspects. And all these three aspects are preparatory to the fourth. The first stage, I would say, is education. Receiving the teaching, that is the ideas. And this will involve formulating an aim, at least provisional. The second is cleansing, the struggle to awaken, that is, struggling with the features of sleep, struggling with chief feature and sacrificing one's suffering. In the early days, Gurdjieff referred to this once as creating the moon in oneself, and I think it's a good description, which is why I've taken it out of the archives. The third aspect is nourishing, or what we call in mystical discourse, illumination. This is spiritualizing the body, relaxing and awakening it through conscious sensation and filling it with feeling. I see these as three aspects of sensation, differentiated by whether the passive, active, or reconciling force is being mediated by sensation. Gurdjieff did not say that in those words. This is my interpretation of what he said. But certainly the techniques I'm referring to and which have led me to that are authentic Gurdjieff with no admixture. This stage he referred to also as creating sun in oneself. And this aspect is marked by the crystallization of the astral body, what he also called the Kesjan body, the body of a higher emotional center. Now, the fourth stage and the critical stage is consolidation, the connection with the great reservoir. And this connection is needed to make permanent what has been gained. I don't wish to give the impression that the great reservoir is innate. The contents of the great reservoir are beyond description, but one should not and cannot think of them as inert or things. There's a mystery here, but we are now in a place where really, I think without experience in the group, it's impossible to say much more. Thank you.